Yo, what's good, Spirit Squad? As always, it's your boy Dre, and if you like what you're watching, make sure to actually click like on the video, subscribe to the channel if you haven't already done so, and make sure to hit the video description because that's where all the relevant information is going to be. Thanks so much for your time, love y'all, and let's get right into it. Yo, so the reason we're excited right now is because there's a lot of new and exciting magic stuff to talk about as far as the Spirits universe goes, and a lot of stuff outside of the world of Spirits too. In this set, Innistrad Midnight Hunt, we got a new Spirit Lord, we've got a whole mechanic that works around spirits, we've got a sweet new removal spell that we can play, and we got a mythic. So life is pretty exciting if you want to talk about spirits. There's even a bunch of non-spirits content too, like there's the challenger decks, which by the way we got a price point for. There's new spoilers as far as secret lairs, and there's just everything this week. Like, I'm really hype, y'all. Alright, so first up is going to be Patrician Geist, and this is going to be the newest Spirit Lord that we have access to. For anybody who hasn't checked out the spoiler, Patrician Geist is going to be 2 and a blue for a 2/2 flying Spirit Knight. Other spirits you control get +1/+1, and spells you cast from your graveyard cost 1 less to cast. So a lot of this stuff here is, you know, a lot of what you would want in a Spirit Lord. It flies, it gives +1s, and that's usually all we want to ask for when we're trying to race opponents. Unfortunately, this card comes with a lot of problems, right? Like, just being a 2/2 on its own means that it opens itself up to a lot of extra removal that neither Supreme Phantom or Empyrean Eagle have to deal with. So things like Bone Crusher Giant, Unholy Heat at level 1, I guess, Fire Ice, the Fire Half, all of those things deal exactly 2 damage. Kozilek's Return is another good example. All of these things do 2 damage, but the lords we play have 3 toughness to escape that. If you jam in a 2 toughness lord, you're just opening yourself up to a bunch of removal. So unfortunately, I think this one just isn't really it. And it's nowhere near as powerful just on the battlefield as something from another deck like Merfolk gets to play Marrow Regery. And even though Marrow Regery is a 2/2, that card, if you untap with it, can just end games. Patrician Geist doesn't really do that. And unlike another deck like Merfolk, Spirits is really, really full at the 3-drop spot. Like, we already have a million cards in every format that we want to play for 3. Like, we have Spell Quellers, we have Drog Skull Captains, we have Skyclave Apparition. It's pretty hard to excuse playing a 2/2 Lord. And the last part, the spells you cast from your graveyard cost 1 less. Unfortunately for spirits, that's just kind of like flavor text. There are some spirits adjacent cards that we will be able to use with this technically. Like, we can use the back half of Lingering Souls for a single black. We can make all of the new Disturb mechanic cards a little bit cheaper. But overall, I think Patrician Geist just this ain't it, y'all. This ain't the one. So next up is going to be Fateful Absence. And no, I don't mean like that time your dad went to the store to get milk when you were 8. What I mean is going to be the new removal spell that's here, and I think this one's pretty playable. I think it's good for both Pioneer and Modern. And what it does is, for 1 and a white, it's an instant. You destroy target creature or planeswalker, and its controller investigates. And don't let that investigate thing kind of scare you off of this card. Like, yes, it sucks to give your opponent an extra card, and yes, it sucks against some decks to give your opponent an extra artifact. We get it. But the upsides to this thing are really big. So being an instant in Pioneer lets us know that we're going to have access to things like Lofty Denial mana if we need it, Rattle Chains mana if we need it, and mana for this Fateful Absence if we need it. So you can leave up 2 mana, you know, as early as turn 2, and your opponent doesn't know what you have access to because you'll have access to threats, removal, or counter spells now that we actually have a playable instant speed removal spell. In Modern, it's going to be a lot of the same. We were already playing cards like Path to Exile kind of begrudgingly, and now we do get to play cards like Prismatic Ending that are, to be honest, really good. Like, Prismatic Ending is, that card rocks. But we get to play another card here in Fateful Absence that is both instant speed, still letting you leave up cards like Spell Quellers and Rattle Chains, but also we don't really give our opponents enough time to use the clue token. Like, spending 2 mana to draw a card against us is actually a really big liability, because our clock is so fast in both formats that our opponents typically just don't really have time to spend their mana doing things that are not actually interacting with our board, because they're going to get dead. And if they let us untap with creatures, then we have mana to do our own thing. We have mana for spell quellers and rattle chains and counter spells, and it just sucks to be them, right? So this card, I believe, is going to be a lot better than it looks, and I look forward to trying to playing this. In Modern, another upside to Fateful Absence too is that it costs 2 mana. For us, that's actually a big deal, because it means that we can play Chalice of the Void and still have access to this Fateful Absence here. This means that we'll be able to remove problem creatures without sacrificing our ability to play Chalice of the Void and, you know, worry about, oh, well, maybe I can't play Portable Hole, maybe I can't play Path to Exile, and what do I do about giant creatures? Well, this Fateful Absence solves that problem for us. We get to kill things that we otherwise would be using Path to Exile for, like Primeval Titans and Thought Knot Seers. Things like Murktide Region's a big one. Stormwing Entities sucks pretty bad for us, but Fateful Absence takes care of all of those things, and we can just kind of keep it moving and flying, and life is all happy for us. So I'm really excited to try playing this card. I think I'm going to start off with 2 of these in Modern, and then kind of see what I feel like doing with this spot in Pioneer. But either way, I'm pretty hyped for this. So the next thing we got is going to be the Disturb mechanic. And the Disturb mechanic is just on blue and white cards for now. What it does is you get a front half of a creature like this Devoted Gravekeeper here that you just cast like normal. It's going to be 1 and a white, it's a 2/1 creature, you mill a couple cards. Whenever you cast a spell from your graveyard, you tap something you don't control. And when this card is in your graveyard, you can pay 1 a white and a blue to pay 3, and instead of the front half, you get the back half of this card. The back half is going to be a 3/1 spirit here, this Departed Soulkeeper. It can only block creatures with the flying, and if it would be put into a graveyard from anywhere, you exile it instead. So you don't get to just like loop these things. And unfortunately for us, the one that we're looking at right now, this Departed Soulkeeper, is hands down the most playable of the Disturb cards. And I don't believe that this card's good enough for either Modern or Pioneer. And it's unfortunate, because the mechanic actually has a lot of room to be super sweet, right? Like, we get to have a little bit of built-in card advantage by having a card on the battlefield, and then when it dies, we can cast it again from our graveyard. But the front half of just about all of these cards are humans, not spirits. And that makes these cards pretty unplayable, because our cards need to be playable just as they come. And if we got cards that were just like better than, you know, a ground pounding 2/1 for 1 that doesn't protect our creatures, then maybe we could explore looking into the idea of the Disturb cards. But I just don't really think that any of the Disturb cards are really here for us. This Departed Soulkeeper, like I said, is like hands down the best of the bunch for us, and this card's kind of stinks. So yeah, F in the comments. So this is it, y'all. This is the big one. This is the one that everybody's been talking about. It's going to be the highlight blue mythic of Midnight Hunt. It's going to be the highlight spirit of Midnight Hunt. This thing is very tailor-made for us. And what Spectral Adversary does is, for 1 and a blue, you get a 2/1 flash flyer. So that's already the same as a Rattle Chains, right? But it's got a lot of extra text. When Spectral Adversary enters the battlefield, you can pay 1 and a blue any number of times. When you pay this cost 1 or more times, you put that many +1 counters on Spectral Adversary, then up to that many other target artifacts, creatures, and or enchantments phase out. And that's pretty exciting, right? Like, you get a flash threat at 2 mana, you get a potentially huge creature later on in the game. I don't know, say you have like 6 or God forbid even 8 mana in the late game. You can just put mana into it and just make a big giant threat, you know. And we'll talk about some applications of the fake multi-kicker ability too, but for now we've got a really exciting bit of multi-kicker that's almost exciting as Chun-Li. So here's going to be a sample modern list with the Spectral Adversary as a 2 of. And I think this card's got a lot of utility in modern. So its first function will just be as a 2/1 flash flyer. That is what you're going to do with this card the most. But in a pinch, you can pay 4 mana and have it effectively be Skyclave Apparitions number 5 and 6, so that you can just get a lot of problem permanents off the table for exactly 1 turn. And a lot of the time, doing the phasing part of that will be enough to solve the problems you have. Like, if you have an opponent who is trying to do Valakut things, you can respond to those Valakut things by getting rid of their Dryad of the Elysian Grove with your Spectral Adversary. If you're playing against a Tron opponent or a Lantern opponent, you can get rid of their Ensnaring Bridge for 1 turn, but that's probably all you need to attack anyway. If you're playing against one of the blue-red decks, you can get rid of Murktide Regent or Stormwing Entity, and that way they don't have to worry about having a giant blocker or a giant attacker to help you lose that race. If you're playing against some like shenanigans, you can get rid of just miscellaneous cards like Worship and stuff that we otherwise have a pretty hard time dealing with outside of exactly our copies of Skyclave Apparition. So I think that the Spectral Adversary has a lot of play when we are trying to use it offensively to get through our opponent's problem cards, or defensively if we're looking to either get rid of their problem cards or just have it be like a bad Rattle Chains. Also, remember that Spectral Adversary is not a cast ability. Its 1 and a blue is an enters the battlefield, which means that it does work with Aether Vial. So if you Aether Vial in your Spectral Adversary, you will still be able to pay the 1 and a blue. So if you only have 2 mana and an Aether Vial, cool, that works. If you have 4 mana, that works too. Doesn't change anything. So I think this card's got a pretty decent amount of potential as far as playing on offense or defense. And that's going to be just the modern example. Next up are going to be a couple of Pioneer lists I think use it even better than we get to use it in modern. So here we've got a blue-white spirits list in Pioneer, and we'll notice that this deck gets to play 3 copies of Spectral Adversary, as well as all the rest of the normal spirits. We're actually not even making too many like sacrifices to be able to play it. The only card that you're not really playing here that you would normally be playing in blue-white spirits is gonna be Selfless Spirit, and that's and or Empyrean Eagle. I usually try to cut Empyrean Eagle anyway because I'm just not a fan of tapping out 3 mana at sorcery speed, but honestly that's just always been the case, so take my bias as you will. Anyway, with the Spectral Adversary in this deck, you get to keep up flash threats on turn 2 forward much more often, and that matters a lot in Pioneer, because the Pioneer version of Spirits wants to play cards like Lofty Denials, it plays things like Spell Pierces in the main, and you don't get to play things like Drog Skull Captain, so even having poor ways to protect your own creatures is still a way to protect your own creatures. It still is good enough to see play in Pioneer. And then you also have a bunch of problem permanents from our opponent's side of things that we need to take care of. For example, Auras and the blue-red Scissors decks both play a bunch of creatures that can outpace us and creatures that can fly to block us. You can get rid of a Jeskai Ascendancy on your opponent's side of the table so that the combo deck doesn't get to combo. They're just playing like a bunch of bad cards like Opt and stuff once you've taken away their Jeskai Ascendancy. You get to just have another flash threat, which cannot really be overstated in this deck. And the coolest thing about Spectral Adversary in the blue-white version of this deck is that it pairs really well with Watcher of the Spheres. I mean, everything pairs well with Watcher, but with a Watcher of the Spheres, you can, turn 1 Mausoleum Wanderer, turn 2 Watcher of the Spheres, turn 2 have the mana, turn 3 you have the mana ability of Spectral Adversary up with casting it, because it's going to be a grand total of 3 instead of 4, and that makes a really big difference too, especially since you can't like leave up a Rattle Chains to protect the Watcher of the Spheres. That's not how that works. Watcher isn't actually a spirit, but you can pay 3 mana and protect it with Spectral Adversary. That works just fine. So I think the blue-white version of this deck is going to be able to take some sweet advantage of Spectral Adversary in this format, where it's probably not quite powerful enough to be a 4 of in modern. And here we have mono blue spirits, and this is going to be a Pioneer standby, and I think the best home for a card like Spectral Adversary, and that's going to be for a few reasons. So First and foremost, Spectral Adversary just is another 2-mana flash threat. With a deck like Mono Blue, you always want to have mana open. So even starting on turn 2, you have just a million options available to the previous versions of Mono Blue Spirits, and that only increases with the addition of Spectral Adversary. Here, with 2 mana, we can play things like Spell Pierce, we can play You See a Guard Approach to protect our creatures, Curious Obsession, Lofty Denial, Rattle Chains. We can use the mana ability from Ascendant Spirit. We have Rattle Chains, and now Spectral Adversary gets added to the mix as well. So this deck just gets to play a lot of good flash threats. It doesn't really have to tap out, and because we're adding so many flash threats to this deck, your copies of Nebelgast Herald actually look really good. So you don't have to worry too much about, running out of flash threats if you're playing against something with big giant creatures like, say, Black-White Auras or the Green-Blue Stompy deck. You have quite a few flash creatures to play out and make sure that your Nebelgast Herald's ability is always on. And the 1 or 2 times you do need to use Spectral Adversary's ability to either protect your own creatures or play offensively, well, that ability's there too as soon as you get 4 mana. But in this deck, it's primarily going to be at its best just as another good flash threat. And I think that's going to be good enough for it to be a 4 of in this style of deck, because you get to play your 12 1-drops, you have Curious Obsession, and starting turn 2 forward, you're super likely to draw either another 1-drop to keep playing offensively, or to start playing 2-drops with Flash so that your opponent never knows whether you have a counterspell or not. And I think just the addition of another good flash threat is honestly worth the price of a Mythic if you're actually going to be playing this deck, or the Simic Spirits list, because they play pretty similarly. If you're going to be playing either of those decks with the Curious Obsession builds, I think you really want to max out on your flash threats, and Spectral Adversary certainly fits that bill. So I think this card's got a pretty sweet home here in Pioneer in this deck. So overall, y'all, I think we caught a W. I think Spectral Adversary is a pretty good card, and I think it's going to enable us to play at instant speed a lot more often, which means that this is going to be fringe playable in Modern, since we already talked about some of the stuff it can get rid of, and I think it's going to be very playable in Pioneer, where we need to be leaving mana open more often to cast cards like Lofty Denial. So overall, I think I really like this card, and Fateful Absence is really just kind of icing on the cake. So I'm pretty hyped for those 2 things. The Disturb mechanic itself, I think, is an L, but the fact that the Disturb mechanic exists tells us that we may be getting something sweet out of Innistrad set 2. So I wouldn't sleep on the Disturb mechanic just because the cards aren't good for us this time around. We will probably get something cool from the Disturb mechanic next set, so still keep your eyes peeled for that. I think that Patrician Geist is an L, but also shows us that they're willing to print more things for Spirits. So just be on the lookout for that, in a couple of months when that set comes out too, because it is just going to be a thing in November, so only 2 months from now. So yeah, W's overall. I'm looking forward to playing Spirits and Pioneer in the Mana Trader series, probably this coming up week, because this month's format is in fact Pioneer. The set drops on Thursday, so that'll be a great excuse to, get some games in and play around with the new cards and provide y'all with some gameplay videos. So this should be pretty exciting times all around. But that's really going to be a video for today, y'all. If you think that I am a little too high up on Spectral Adversary, let me know in the comments. If you think I'm dissing Patrician Geist a little too much, let me know what it is. Or if you think that one of the Disturb cards might be better than I think it is, hey, tell me about that too. But that's going to be really our thoughts for today. If you do like what you're watching, as always, make sure to leave a like and subscribe to the channel here. Oh, also important. So one of my personal friends, Justin, has actually made me a sweet avatar, and that means that we actually have the ability to turn that into things that are wearable, like apparel. I'm waiting on mine to show up already, but if you want to show even more support, you can pick some up too. We've got hoodies and a coffee mug, both with this sweet Rattle Chains apparition avatar here. So that's going to be awesome. I'm really excited to get to wear some of those in an upcoming video, and I'm hoping they show up by Thursday so that I can start playing these things in the Pioneer tournament when the set drops. So look forward to that as well. I'll make sure to leave a link to that in the description so y'all can check that out. But other than that, just thanks so much for your time, and I hope everybody has a great day.